Every year, we celebrate freedom. The freedom to speak, to gather, to dream, to begin again. And on nights filled with fireworks and songs, we remember the sacrifices that helped preserve it. But Scripture reminds us, there's another kind of freedom our hearts are searching for. Because even in the land of independence, people still carry fear, shame, bitterness, the weight of trying to hold life together on their own. And maybe that's the paradox of faith. True freedom isn't found in depending more on ourselves. It's found in depending on God. Trusting His ways, following His voice, surrendering what we were never meant to carry alone. Because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And the more we lean into Him, the more free we become. This Independence Day, may we remember, true independence begins with dependence on God.
Well, again, good morning. It's great to see you, and thank you again for being here. Looking forward to this time together. As we said earlier, we're taking this verse, from John chapter 8, that we're most familiar with. When we hear the word freedom, that's just it's woven into our culture. All right, it just is. And when we hear that word, we immediately think of not being bound by anything. I'm free. I can do whatever I want. You know, I don't have anything. I can do whatever I want. I'm not held down by anything or by anybody. I'm not indebted to anyone. We hear that word freedom. It brings national pride. You know, we have the big, all the celebrations and all the different stuff. All that's good. We hear free giveaway. Boy, that draws a crowd, right? I mean, they're giving something away, so people just come. It's just woven into our culture. It's become part of not just our vernacular and our just everyday common speech, but our desires. But what I want us to look at this morning, and again, this is certainly not in a negative context at all, but as we look at what Christ is sharing with us in this passage, and really trying to get the people that it says who believed. All right, so that's important. Getting them to understand that many are not truly free in the sense of what it really means. We become accustomed to the again, societal things and structural things and all that stuff, and we determine definitions by that. But sometimes we have to look deeper, and that's what we try to do here when we come together and gather. So as we turn to this text, John chapter 8, begin verse 31, we find an entirely different concept here. We find that the pursuit of truth is what brings one to freedom. So what does that look like? How is that defined? Where does that put us? What does that mean? So I want us to go on a little walk this morning. And I want us to go on this walk with Jesus. And I want us, a few weeks ago we talked about those walking that 7-mile stretch, and that was powerful. And so we see here we're going to take a little walk with Jesus. And let's find out for a moment what is actually being said here in these verses. What is really being said to us? Because sometimes familiar, when we've heard something over and over, we just determine through tradition and whatever, oh, that's it. And we never look deeper than that. And sometimes we short ourselves when we don't look deeper. Because sometimes the surface, and you've heard my water analogy many times if you've listened to me, and any times over these last few years, the surface is one thing. What's underneath is when you really begin to find out what's there. Whether it's a beautiful life or whether it's colors or whether it's danger, there's something always under the surface. So what are we talking about? What's being said here? So it tells us, then Jesus said, so he is responding to something, right? He is responding, whether it's questions, whether it's an ongoing conversation, because this group around him, if we just look back quickly to verse 30, it says, and he was saying these things, and as he was saying these things, many believed in him. All right, so that's the people he's addressing. So we find here in this verse, and where we're picking up in verse 31, that he said to the Jews who had believed him. So we can see how he's addressing, because he's recognizing and acknowledging their sincerity. All right, they really believe. All right, they believe. They're listening to him. They believed in him. But he needs to address surface and depth, because there's two different things. Many people sometimes get caught up into the surface because that's easy. That's an easy draw. Well, look at it, and they don't look at what's underneath it. It's beautiful, but maybe there's danger underneath. Maybe there's something else. Maybe there's a big price tag. You know, go into a store, something looks great. You look at the price tag, and it's like, oh, well, I don't know if I really want to pay that much, right? But it looks really good, but I'm not. That's how life is sometimes. Everything looks good until you find out what it cost. Everything looks good until you find out it's just as easy. I mean, we're not talking about 2 easy payments in 1995 or none of those kind of things. We're talking about reality. And so it says that he says to them, he's talking to them. So he's continually speaking to those who believe. In other words, they've come to trust what he's saying. They've come to believe that, and when they say they trust him, it's not the fact that they're just acknowledging the fact that he's standing there. They're not looking at that reality, but rather that what he tells them is real. It says they believe in him. All right, so they're trusting what he's saying. He says to them, he says, if you continue. Now, you've heard me say it many times before. Obviously, if is the key word in all things, because if provides a choice. If always provides. If you continue, but that also means you don't have to. So if you continue, but the alternative is, but you don't have to. If you continue on this way, this is what happens. If you don't, then you don't. It's pretty simple here. If you continue, so if you hold on to what you believe now, what you trust now, if you stay on that road, you'll get to the place you desire. You'll get there. If you stay on that road, you'll find what you're looking for. You find the thing you're desiring, which that will be true freedom, because he said that'll set you free. That'll set you free. If you continue. What is that word? We think about that word. What? Again, it's important sometimes to break things down, to look at the simplicity of how this is being laid out, because continue is talking about truly pursuing, truly learning, truly growing, living it out, watching the examples given to you, not creating something new, but continuing, he says, in my word. Well, what was that? His word was his life. It was his examples. It was what he was laying out. This was lessons and illustrations and examples. Why? Why was he telling that this was so important? Because he was trying to point them to the real answer. He was trying to point them to the truth, the one thing that can change everything, the truth. He says the truth will set you free. All right. Now, we can have a lot of fun with that because it goes in all kinds of different ways. You know, I heard this one thing on Sanford & Son, one of my favorite shows. He said, well, Uncle Leotis the other day said the truth. He said the truth in court and it got him 6 months. But that's a whole different story. But here he's saying that it will set you free, which tells us that free is not just meaning shackled. Free is not just meaning I can roam around and do what I want. There's something else. There's a different level of depth and emotion and spiritual and every other things that we see here. So he says, if you continue, that's the, again, key word. He said, you really are. It'll be clear if you're serious or not. He said, you really are my disciples. You really are. If you continue in this, again, you're serious. This is not a performance type thing, but it'll be obvious that you're driven by something else. You really are my disciples. Not just following in the literal sense of walking behind and copying, but rather you're telling somebody else. That's what the disciple part of that is. It's not just, oh yeah, I'm a member over so-and-so, or I believe in Jesus. No. There's something more. And he says, so if you continue in what I'm teaching you, you really are. Continuing means going past today. Continuing means I'm ever learning, I'm ever growing, I'm ever progressing, I'm ever trying to evolve in the literal sense of I want to be more. I want to transform from the guy that was to the one that's coming. I want to be there. In other words, pass it on. Pay it forward. That's what he's trying to get one to understand here. He says, you will know the truth. How? How is that possible? I agree 100%. Amen. He said, you will know the truth. The one says, how? How is that possible? Because they know him. Think about what he's saying here. He said, you will know the truth. Well, he identified himself as the truth, right? He said, I am the truth. All right, so he says, you will know the truth. So this is a literal pointing to relationship. This is not about the accumulation of facts and figures and statements, because sometimes we know the statements are not true. You know, or they've got things added to them that weren't really there. We can go on, but he says, you will know the truth. There'll be something transformative inside of you. There'll be something there that says, that's something different. They know him. He is the truth. What he shares is the truth. What he lives out is the truth. Where he points is the truth. Life instruction is the truth. What he gives them, truth. Why is it truth? Because it is void of deception. See, the truth is, if I tell you this won't hurt, then that actually has to be true. But that's why when you were little and the nurse said this will only hurt for a little while, that meant that it was actually going to include that, right? And so that's what he said. But he said, what I'm sharing with you is truth. And he said, you will know the truth. But truth there meaning it is void of deception. I'm giving you the honest answer. It is void of evil intent. It is always about making your life better. That is what the truth is, because it is opening doors. It is closing doors. It is changing everything so that you will understand. He said, you will know, and you'll know. When we say know, he means it won't be a guess. It won't be a wonder. It won't be a speculation. He said, you will know. There will be no doubts. No doubts. And he says, and that truth, the one that can be known, because he said you will know the truth, the one that can be known, he says, it'll set you free. It'll set you free. Now, what we find here is that word set. And some versions use the word make. All right? We're going to get hung up on all that. Here it says the word set. It implies the idea of one who is not free. It does. It will set you free. Therefore, in the context of that means you're not. It will set you free. It is pointing to one who is bound in some fashion, one who is captive in some manner, one who is seeking the key, if you will, the escape, the freedom. So Jesus says here, the truth is what will do that. The real truth is what? Because truth is powerful. Truth is important. And he's teaching it can be known. It is not impossible. You know, there's an argument in the world today. Does truth exist? You know, some say it doesn't, because we live in such a world of deception. You know, you don't know what to believe anymore. That's what he's trying to get them to understand. Stay focused on what I'm trying to show you. He says, if you continue in my word. He's very, very specific in that. He's saying the truth can be known because it's personal, it's possible, it's logical, and it can be applied. Here, he's not just simply teaching Bible memorization. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about application. He's not talking about just attaining freedom. He's talking about remaining free. See, because I know a whole lot of people that were free that ended up like this. Okay, so you can lose that in the sense of, I got it, I can do whatever I want. There's a cost with that. You know, you can do whatever you want. That's absolute. Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians. He says, all things are permissible. You can do whatever you want. Just not all things are beneficial. Well, there's this truth in that, okay? This is all he's pointing us to. So he's not just talking about just an appearance of, but an application of. He says you can remain free. But how do we get there? How does one get there? Because we see the response. Let's look at what's being said here. He tells them this. He said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The truth will make you free. And then we see the response. Instantly a tone change. Instantly a tone change. A defensive tone, if you will, because they said, hold on a minute. We are the descendants of Abraham. How dare you say that? We can't be enslaved. We've never been known by anybody. I mean, what are you talking about? How are we not free? They were just focused on that word. They got caught on that word. They got snagged by that word because they were looking at the context of the literal ownership. Nobody owns me. Nobody tells me what to do. Sounds like teenagers. But we say, what are you talking about? So they took offense. They took offense to the idea that he somehow placed them in this category. How could you possibly say that we are free? We already are. And that is exactly the lesson he was trying to get them to see. You're not. Because you're basing your freedom on what you know, not what you do. You're basing your freedom on what you've just gotten familiar with and what you've just become comfortable with, but you're not applying it. So their hackles are all up. We've never been enslaved to anyone. You could almost hear the indignant nature of their reply as they're out of sorts. I mean, they're basically saying, how dare you? We become free. We already are. What are you talking? Think about the tone and think about the response of that. Sounds like a bunch of church people, don't it? How dare you say? But he's trying to say, I want you to look beyond what you're familiar with. I want you to look beyond what you've just settled on. Because if you're never willing to look beyond one thing, you'll never learn anything else. You know, it's like playing an instrument. You know, if you're a guitar player and you learn G, okay, your song library is limited. Okay, that's just a fact. All right, he said, let's look beyond where we are. Let's understand the way things are moving in this way. So this was how they replied. They missed the entire point, as we often do. Again, this is not being critical. This is just fact. We all can get there really easy. Because again, they only considered one meaning when it came to the word free. They did not see the wideness of that. They didn't see the broadness of his teaching here because Jesus was pointing them to something deeper. This spoke of what he was speaking of, your heart, your soul, your mind, all these different things, the places that freedom affect the most. And why are those places important? Because he says the number one command in the law is to love God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul. Those can't be done if they're not free. That's really what he's pointing us to. You got to have that stuff cleared out. You got to have those things clean. You got to have those things in a position where you can grow and learn. Because physical freedom and emotional/spiritual freedom are not the same thing. They are not the same thing. Understanding what things truly, truly mean versus assumptions and guesses and opinions, that's the difference between freedom and captivity. And a lot of people don't realize that they are. Again, and I'm going to talk about this as we continue breaking this, but as we look about in the nature of the time that we're in and the celebrations that's coming with the 250th and all this stuff. There was a man back in the 1800s by the name of Horace Greeley. All right, very interesting comment here, okay? Horace Greeley, and he said this. He said, it is impossible to enslave mentally or socially a Bible-reading people. That's what he said. 200 and whatever years ago. He said it is impossible to enslave a Bible-reading people, for the principles of the Bible are the groundwork for human freedom. But what we find here, what's important to understand, it's the application rather than the performance. It is the application rather than the memorization. Because some people, and again, I don't mean this in any way critical, but some people can quote you the whole Bible. They know word for word. But their life don't show it. Okay? I mean, he's talking about what does it mean to apply? That's how we become free. That's how we become to understanding what's really, really going on. It's much deeper. So we look here at Jesus, those who believed. That's what it said. That's our audience, okay? It says, verse 30, he was saying these things and many believed him. And in verse 31, he said this to those who had believed. So that is his audience. And now those who had believed, so we have the specifics of that word. We see now they are sideways because he told them they weren't free. What happened? What happened? What was going on? Well, that's how they took it, because that's not what he told them. He was trying to get them to look beyond themselves. Sometimes we don't like to do that. You know, I'm right and that's it. Well, that's not always the way that it works. Not just in relationships, but just in general. What did he really say? He had told them, if you continue, we'll stay on the pathway that we're on. If you'll do that, you'll find freedom. If you'll stay where we are, if you listen, because you believe in me, you trust in me, I'm not going to lead you wrong. If you'll stay on that, I'll show you to get where you want to get. We will get there together. You'll find freedom. He said, you'll be set free. And this had nothing to do with being owned by another, but rather being owned by something else. So we don't factor that in a lot of times. You know, we don't think about the depth of what's really said there. He said, truly, I tell you. Truly, I tell you. In other words, will you let me help you see my point? Just give me a minute. Listen to me let me show you my point, because it's not what you're thinking. Yeah, you got your hackles all up and you're all out of sorts now because I said it'll set you free, implying that you're not. But I want you to listen to me. There's a much deeper lesson here. He says, I tell you, everyone. That's an important word because that means there's no exclusions. Okay, he says, everyone who commits. Now, the word commit here is important because that means you did it. Okay? You were hands-on. You were participating. You took part in, whatever, however you want to do that. You're a participant. He said, everyone who commits sin is a slave of sin. Okay, now let's stop right there for a minute. Let's look at this. There's a couple of things. Who is he talking to? The people that think they are free. The people that think they are free. Because they said so. I mean, we're descendants of Abraham. How could we be anything but free? They only understood the literalcy of that. They weren't understanding. But he's telling them, no, you're actually slaves. Well, they didn't like that. How could this be? How could you possibly say that to me? It's just like today. They had turned faith into a system. Hear me out. They knew religion. They knew that. They knew it. They knew tradition. They knew rituals. They knew all of that. They knew all the rules. But they didn't understand that freedom could only be found in the truth. They didn't understand that freedom could only be found within what Jesus was pointing them to, because all those other things, while structural and this and that, what can they be? Added to. Added to. Changed around. It still happens today. It still happens today. The word sin, we hear that word and immediately we get out the checklist. What's on that list? Who did what? How's it work? The problem with that, friends, is that list varies from place to place. It all depends on where you go. All right, let's look at that. Let's think about it for real here. Because it's okay here, but over there it's not. It's okay here, but that's a big no-no in Mama's house. All right? And if Mama said it was wrong, and that's the end of it, right? That's the way it works. But Pastor so-and-so was blasting his congregation the other day about, what does all of those things sound like? Opinions. What was the truth? What was actually being said? This is a true story. I once had an outreach event. So this is many, many years ago. I was just brand new in ministry, my very first church. But there was another local church that I had gotten to be friends with the pastor. And now we did not know each other that well. So we didn't know all of our, things that would bother anybody, okay? But anyhow, he asked me because he knew that I had been involved in the world of professional wrestling. And we had done a couple of outreach events in the general area that had done very, very well. And we would put the ring up in the parking lot, and we'd have a bunch of guys come in. We'd do a performance, do a show, share our testimony at the end. It was a great thing. We had a lot of fun. We'd draw thousands of people at some of these events, hundreds and others. And anyhow, he got wind of that, and he said, I would love to have one of those at my church. I said, okay. And he was in a great location. It was right on a major highway. We could have drawn from the crowd, and it was always free and stuff like that. So I contacted all my guys. We got them in town. We put the ring up. We got everything going. We had it all laid out. And so his building was structured similarly like this in that there was a long hallway. And so I had the guys all the way down at the end of the hallway down there, and we had kind of created a makeshift dressing room. And it was so funny because I was coming in the door, and here this gentleman comes running down the hallway at full speed, hands flailing in the air. And I'm like, Lord have mercy, what's wrong? He said, oh, Pastor. And he's calling me. And I said, yes. He said, we got a problem. I said, what? He said, there's a man back there with a deck of cards. I said, what? And I go back there, and the man was playing solitaire, just passing time. And I'm like, okay. So you never know. You never know from time to time what. Okay. So we can go from the silliest and to, okay, this is good here and that's not good. But what is the truth? What points us there? Because when we think of that word, sin, we immediately have all these different ideas and connotations in our mind. But what has happened, and I mean this sincerely, we've redefined that word to the point that actions we disagree with, that becomes a sin. Okay? The actions that and we do so without biblical reference. Oh, that's just wrong. But there's no basis for that. It's just, I don't like it, so it's got to be wrong, right? And that turns into an opinion. The word actually means miss the mark. If we get back to the whole historical context and how it was formed, and it's 2 or 3 different words put together and all this other stuff. But what is the mark? That's what. It's the understanding of coming to know what it really means to know God. The truth. That's all it means. It's very simple. God, what does God and knowing God actually look like? What does that reveal in our hearts? Well, it reveals a changed person. It reveals a changed perspective. It reveals a renewing of something that's just beyond your ability to do on your own. It's knowing that hope actually exists. They sang about that in one of the songs, that our living hope. It's understanding that's real. That's what we come to. And we understand that change is possible. We don't see circumstances as hopeless and endless and pointless and all this stuff. We see, no, there's an answer here. In other words, that's what brings true freedom. That's what changes our hearts and minds to the ability that we can do it. So Jesus here is saying, if you start following things that lead you away from what I'm trying to show you, that lead you away from the truth, it'll hold you. And not only will it hold you, it will own you. Now, we hear that and we think, well, what could it be? And we immediately go to things like addiction, okay, because that's got people in the death hold and the grabs. But I want to add some things to that list. What about fear? Fear enslaves a multitude of our population today. How about anger? How many people are just angry? I heard this statement yesterday. People are going to agree or disagree, but I thought it was a fantastic statement. The guy said, you know what anger is? He said, the definition of anger for me, he said, anger is a punishment I give myself for something somebody else did. Wow, that's heavy, but it's true. But what about anger? What about bitterness? I just can't get over it. I remember there was an old aunt that we grew up around, and this lady she had a stool in her kitchen, a big high stool, right underneath the dial phone, the rotary dial phone. And she'd sit on that stool and she'd just wring her hands all day long, and talk about all the people that she was mad at and all the people that had done wrong 40 years ago and how she wanted to stomp them and watch their eyeballs roll around like grapes on the floor. I grew up around that, bitterness. People hold on to that stuff forever. How about religion? Yeah, there's a lot of people bound by that. Politics, divisive in every way. Pride. And that list could just go on and on and on about things that hold people in Slavery. Now, I know that's an ugly word because we've created it from a historical context, but we understand it holds. In other words, anything that can make us, anything that can master us will become our master if we don't be careful and if we aren't mindful and if we aren't. And that's not just one single category. It's not just a moral dilemma. The word slave, as I just said, it is harsh. It is vulgar because we've created it that way. We really have. But to understand the intent here, to understand what Jesus is trying to put over here, is he's saying the one who commits sin, however that is identified, is a slave to that sin. Because the slave has no freedom. The slave has no choices. It only has bondage. And nothing about that sounds good because it's not. People are held by so many things. And even though it doesn't sound good, and even though it's not good, people sign up every day, unknowingly, not paying it any attention because very rarely do we ever read the fine print. Have you ever gotten yourself in a financial mess, not meaning to, and you go back to maybe the place that you bought the thing from, or it could be a vehicle, it could be anything, and say, man, oh no, you signed it. But you couldn't read it. You couldn't have, my dad used to say a spyglass. You couldn't even see, you couldn't even read the words. Oh, but you signed it. It was there. Sometimes it's important to know what's involved. What are we getting involved in? Because sometimes we think, and we're conditioned for this today, friends. Follow this. Do this. Take this. Go here. Believe me, I would never do you wrong. Just do, it's safe. It's all these, don't go over there. They're bad. Oh, it'll only hurt for a little while. Or it won't hurt very much. One time won't hurt. How many times have people's lives been ruined over that? Man, when I was on the road, I saw people who were absolutely owned. I mean, literally owned by other things, and even at times, sadly, even others. But yet, they considered themselves free. Even in the midst of their addiction or their all the other stuff that we listed, all that stuff, they considered themselves free because they live in America and they weren't in jail. They didn't see it beyond that. That's what the problem is here with those. Those who were talking to Jesus, well, we're from Abraham, so how could anything be wrong? That's our lineage. We're all in. We're all good. Yet still, at the same time, they were under full control of the Roman government. They didn't see the issue between the two because they didn't match those things together. So there's the illusion of freedom and there's actual freedom. And those are two very, very different things. And this is what he's trying to get them to see. Because here we find Jesus trying to get them to understand what he's showing them. Because as normal with all of his teachings, thoughts move to illustrations and visuals. So he was trying to find them something that would be culturally identifiable and logical. So we see in verse 35, he says, a slave does not remain in the household forever, but a son does remain forever. So what is he talking about here? So again, we get into cultural relevance. In those days, the slave could live in the master's house. That was very, very acceptable, a very common thing. They could work there. They could receive the benefits of being there. But they never had claim to anything. They never had claim to the family. They never had claim to inclusion. You're just here. You're a part of the property. You kind of come with it. You know, it's like when you buy a house and the refrigerator stays. It's just part of the house. It has no rights. It has no benefits. It has no inheritance or no nothing. That's what it was. So the idea of freedom being I can do whatever I want because I'm free to do it, because it's available, because I have access to it. And I'm not talking about vices just particularly or being naughty, but simply I can do whatever I want. We consider that freedom. But we never grasp the idea you'll never own it. It owns you. You ever known a chain smoker? I'm not picking on smokers. Have you ever known a chain smoker? Put one out and get one out. They can't stop. It's got them. It's got them. I mean, and again, that's the kind of stuff that we see happen in people's lives. I can't stop. And then we're not talking about just addictions. We're talking about just they've become so owned by the thing that's got them, whatever it is, their anger, their bitterness, all these different things. They can't see past it. They can't seem to turn it loose. And it's got a hold on them. That's not freedom. That's not freedom. Anybody that says, I have to do it, they're not free. They're bound by whatever it is, whatever that is the definition of in that day. People today oftentimes struggle with that. I have to do this, I have to do that, because whatever it may be could be over with at any minute. It becomes a performance after a while. And that's the thing, even with faith matters. I have to do this, I have to do that. Jesus didn't teach that, not at all. But we've evolved it into a performance thing to where if I don't do this, then God's going to be mad at me. If I don't do this, I'm going to lose my way. But that's not what he says. He says, if you just keep doing what I'm trying to show you, you'll be okay. We're the ones that complicated stuff. No, he didn't. And so we find all these different things, and we wrestle with this. But how many live there? They live in this performance-based mentality. They live in this bondage. They live in all this other stuff, and they don't see it because society has created the illusion of freedom. You can do whatever you want, so you're good. You live here. You can do whatever you want. That's good. Is it? Certainly we don't want to be controlled, but we are oftentimes with the things that we allow in our lives. Oh, I can't do this. I can't do. How many times have we said that out of our very mouth? I can't do this because of. We start putting it all together. It's like, oh, now this makes a little bit more sense. Jesus says the slave does not stay forever, but a son does. Why? Inheritance rights. They belong. They belong. Permanent relationship connected in all those different ways. What is the point here? What is he trying to see? What do we see? What is the difference? One owns you. The other is yours to keep. That's two different things. One owns you. The other is yours to keep. The other is yours to benefit from, to love, to cherish, to trust, to have peace with. In other words, one brings freedom with it, one does not. Jesus here keeps trying to tell them, and he's trying to teach them, your lineage, your family, your connections, your religion, that ain't what makes you free. And that's not what makes you secure. It's your relationship with the Son. You see how he turns it? It's such a powerful lesson because he ends in verse 36 of our text today. He said, so he leaves it with that. He said, the Son is where the answer is. And he said, so if the Son sets you free, because in the capacity of even the owned slave, he's the only one that had to say. If he went to dad and said, hey, he needs to go, then he had that ability to do that. Here he says, if the Son sets you free, you really will be free. The Son has the authority. That's what he's trying to teach. That's the lesson here. The Son has the authority. And because what did he teach? No one will come to the Father but by me. He made that very, very clear. In other words, the Son can give what the slave can never earn. That is so important and so powerful. And this all points directly to relationship. We always talk about that. This ties directly to relationship and how true freedom, that's where you find it. And that is why he said, if you continue in my word. So freedom is available. It is accessible. It is real. But the question is, how many are willing to search for it versus just accepting the version they are sold? The answer is in here. The answer is in my willingness to do that. When we think about freedom and we think about what is given to us and we think about the beauty of the lessons of Christ, none more beautiful, more powerful, more profound can be found than at the communion table. As the deacons, the ushers have forth, we think about what is being said here. And it said that on that night that Jesus passed the bread, he broke it and blessed it, and he told him, take and eat, this is my body. When we think about what that means, and we think about the beauty of what would ultimately be a horrible moment as far as physicality is concerned, but we think about the fact of doing that to not only provide, but to ensure our freedom. He says, if you continue to follow in my word, all this ties together. And so when we think of the remembrance of me, we think of what has been done as we take this, as we pass the elements out now. as you think about this, as you partake of this, we'll do it together collectively at the end as everybody's been served. But when we think about what was being given on that night, he's giving a promise. He's giving the pointing to the sacrifice that is about to be made. And when we receive that today and we think about what was done on our behalf, we think of those who give and sacrifice and all the different things, and we think of what Jesus has given us allows us to have the freedom to live in his truth and the ability to walk that out. Even in this difficult world, we have the ability to be set free. So as we contemplate that, as you pray, think over, your place between you and the Lord right now today, and as everybody served, then we'll take this together.